Have you ever been judged? Before you even said a word, imagine sitting quietly on a plane, minding your own business, when a stranger looks at you not as a person, but as a problem. What would you do if someone tried to erase your dignity in front of hundreds of eyes? Would you stay silent, or would you rise in this story? A powerful black woman, a CEO, calm but unbreakable, faces that exact moment. A passenger demands she be removed, convinced she doesn't belong. But what happens next shocks everyone on board, because when truth finally speaks, prejudice freezes. This isn't just a story about racism on a plane. It's about power, integrity, and the strength it takes to hold your ground when the world tells you to sit down. It's about choosing grace over anger, courage over comfort, and justice over silence. So ask yourself, if you were in her seat that day, what would you do? Would you walk away to keep the peace or stand tall to protect your worth? Stay with me, because what happens next will make you question not just how we see others, but how we see ourselves. If you believe stories like this need to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. The Pacific airplane sat quietly by Gate 27 at Denver International Airport. Outside, the sunset dyed the still damp runway a golden yellow. Over the loudspeaker, a flight attendant's voice gently invited first-class passengers to board first. Amara Lewis entered the cabin with a small leather bag over her shoulder. She wasn't wearing the formal suit the others wore, just a beige wool coat, dark slacks, and low-cut shoes with slightly worn heels. But there was something about her that made people turn their heads, a calm, warm, self-assured air. She went to seat 3A, sat down, pulled out her tablet, and looked at the financial report. Everything was quiet until Peter Caldwell appeared. The man was in his 60s, with silver hair, a dark gray vest, and a bright red tie. He put his briefcase down on seat 3B, turned to look at Amara with a surprised look, then frowned. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong compartment." His voice was both polite and cold, as if he wanted to assert his position and authority. Amara looked up, smiling politely. "No, sir, my ticket is 3A. Peter glanced at the flight attendant. Frowning, "I thought this cabin was reserved for Platinum Circle passengers. I paid over $2,000 for this ticket, and I just wanted a quiet flight." Miss Elena Brooks, the head stewardess, walked over. She looked at Amara's ticket, then replied in a professional voice, "Sir," she was also a first-class passenger. Everything was perfectly legal. Peter squinted and shrugged. "Yeah, probably. But you know, maybe there's some mistake in the system." A passenger behind her chuckled. Murmurs spread through the cabin. Amara remained silent. She looked out the window, where the last rays of sunlight slid along the wings. In that moment, she remembered the conference last week when an investor asked her point blank, "Are you really the CEO of Novogenics Labs?" with a similarly skeptical look. Her silence then had silenced the room, and it did the same this time. Elena stood in the middle, embarrassed. "Sir, if you feel uncomfortable, I can rearrange the seats." But Peter interrupted. "Better let her sit in the back business class. I don't want any trouble." Amara turned, her voice as light as a breath. "You needn't bother. I think I'll be fine here, and I have as much right to peace as you do." There was something in her eyes that made Elena pause, not challenge, but soft confidence, a kind of power that needed no proof. Peter looked at her for another second. then angrily sat down in the seat next to her, pulling the seat belt so hard that it made a click sound. No one said anything more, but the atmosphere was so tense that one could hear the clock in the cabin ticking. The engine hummed softly. As the plane began to taxi, Amara opened her tablet, which displayed the financial blueprint for Novogenics Labs, the biomedical company she founded a decade ago. She scrolled through the numbers, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and serenity. Little did she know that this flight would be the start of another storm, and not just in the skies. 5 minutes after takeoff, Peter spoke again, this time quietly, but loud enough for 3 rows of seats to hear, "These days, anyone can buy a first-class ticket. There are no standards anymore." Elena pretended to check the cabin, her eyes glancing at Amara as if to apologize. Amara smiled slightly, not looking at him anymore. She was used to this. As a biology student at MIT, she was stopped at the gate by security guards who thought she was a janitor. When she first started her business, banks turned her down for loans because she lacked a credit history, a way of saying, "We don't trust a black woman to pay back her loans on time." But she got through it all, not with anger, but with perseverance. A young black man sitting in the back row, about 20 years old, saw the scene. He recognized her. Jamal Reed, the new data analyst at Novogenics. He stood up to greet her, then sat back down. A sentence she had said during the training echoed in his head. "Don't try to shout to be heard. Let your actions force them to listen." He smiled. As for Amara, she looked at the purple clouds outside the window, her hand gently touching the old silver ring, the only relic of her father. When she was little, her father had taught her something: they can take away your opportunity, they can take away your honor, but they can never take away how you react. And she still lives like that. Suddenly, there was a soft click. Peter's briefcase was unzipped and opened slightly. A thick stack of documents fell to the floor, revealing the bold words "Novogenics Acquisition Proposal. Confidential." Amara saw clearly. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes turning cold for a moment. Peter bent down to pick it up and stammered. "None of your business." Amara just replied softly, "Sometimes it's my job to protect what I've created." The voice was soft, but it made Peter pause. No one in the cabin understood what was happening. But in seat 3A, things were starting to change. There are flights that not only carry people to another city, but also take them to their own crossroads. And for Amara Lewis, that moment began. In seat 3A, amid the prejudiced stares and silence of unspoken justice. The sky above was still a pale purple. The Pacific airplane sliced through the thin layer of clouds, its wing lights reflecting like 1,000 shards of glass. Amara Lewis sat still, her eyes still fixed on the window, where the light of the sunset was fading. The chatter in the cabin had stopped. Peter Caldwell had plugged in his headphones, leaned back in his seat, pretending to read a magazine but not really paying attention. Elena Brooks walked by, her eyes sweeping over Amara in a silent apology. The air was quiet, except for the steady hum of the engine. Amara let out a soft breath. It was the kind of sigh only those who had endured for years could take, light but deep, as if to reset their minds. She leaned her head back in her chair, closed her eyes, and tried to ease the slight ache in the back of her neck. 20 years in biotech, 8 years running a corporation of hundreds of employees, and there were still moments when people looked at her as if she were in the wrong place. She wasn't angry anymore, just a deep weariness in her heart. Amara opened her eyes and touched the silver ring on her finger. It was old, worn around the edge, engraved in small letters, "Stand Tall." It was a gift from her father before he died. The black man, a mechanic in Alabama who had never left the state in his life, had taught her to hold her head high. Amara smiled slightly as the memories flooded back. She remembered those small evenings sitting on the porch with her father, listening to the crickets and the smell of engine oil from the garage. "Child, they will try to make you doubt your worth. Don't argue, just prove it with your actions," he had said. She was 13 then, not understanding what he meant. Now, she understood every word. When people don't listen, your silence is the loudest answer. The plane entered a stable airspace. The safety sign turned off. Amara got out of her seat and walked quietly to the back of the first-class cabin to get more water. Elena stood there, holding a tray of drinks. She smiled awkwardly. "Miss Lewis, I apologize for what happened. I should have handled it better," Amara replied softly. "It's okay. Elena, I'm used to it." Elena looked at her, her eyes filled with confusion. "You're so calm. I think I would have reacted violently." Amara smiled, her eyes slightly tired. "I tried to react. Years ago. They just saw me as an angry black woman, so I kept quiet. But being quiet doesn't mean giving up." Elena nodded, seeming to understand something deeper. Amara returned to her chair. Peter remained seated, pretending not to notice, but she could see from the corner of his eye that the irritation was still there. She didn't want to stress, just rest. She opened her laptop and looked at the report on the leukemia drug trial that had brought Novogenics to the attention of Washington. The numbers rolled up, and she made a few notes. Every graph, every line of data was the result of years of hard work, long nights in the lab when everyone else was asleep. The announcement came over the loudspeaker. "We are about to serve a light dinner. Please adjust your seats." Amara closed her laptop and smiled at Elena as she served the food. Peter looked at his salad, then at Amara's, whispering just enough for her to hear. "You know, first class is no different from economy class these days. It's hard to maintain class." Amara replied with a thin smile. "Class isn't about the ticket, Mr. Caldwell. It's about how you treat other people." Her voice was gentle, but each word fell as clear as metal. Peter didn't say anything more, just lowered his head and cut the meat, his hands shaking slightly. Jamal Reed, in the back seat, had heard the entire conversation. He looked up slightly, meeting Amara's eyes. She looked at him, nodded slightly. In that moment, Jamal felt a surge of pride. She was the image he and so many young black men needed, calm but firm, insulted but still dignified like a mirror. Time slowed down. The lights in the cabin dimmed, leaving only a long strip of light on the ceiling that reflected off the faces of the sleeping passengers. Amara opened her small notebook and wrote a few short lines, a habit she had kept since her school days. "Every time you're looked down upon, remember why you started, not for recognition, but to pave the way for those who come after you." She finished writing and gently closed the notebook. A slight tremor made the glass on the tray spill a few drops. Amara looked up. Outside the window, thunder flashed in the distance, signaling the plane was flying through a storm. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The air in the cabin was tense. Peter flinched, gripping the armrest. She could hear him gasping for air. For a moment, instinct made her turn to reassure him. "It's just light turbulence. They'll pass quickly." He looked at her, his eyes troubled. something softening. "Aren't you scared?" Amara smiled. "I've flown through worse storms than this." The turbulence passed. The plane steadied. Peter was silent. Perhaps for the first time during the flight, he realized that the woman beside him was not who he thought she was. Not the wrong seatmate, but the one who had been sitting right where she was, for a very clear reason. Outside, the clouds parted, the moon appeared, shining like a silver ribbon. Amara watched, feeling her heart soften. She thought of her daughter at home, Chloe, 8 years old, learning piano. Before leaving for work, she had promised to come home for her daughter's first recital. "I'll fly back early, I promise," she told her daughter over video call this morning. Now, remembering that innocent face, her heart warmed. Elena walked over and asked softly, "Miss Lewis, do you need anything else?" Amara shook her head. "No, thank you. Just a little quiet is enough." Elena smiled and walked away. Amara leaned her head back on the chair. She didn't sleep, just listened to the steady sound of the engine like a heartbeat. Sometimes, silence is where people can see themselves most clearly. She thought about her life, from the little girl in Alabama to the female CEO honored by Forbes, from the rejections to today, sitting here in the sky, all because she never stopped believing that everyone has the same value. The bedroom light was dimmed in the cabin. Peter had fallen asleep. Amara gently adjusted the thin blanket and put her laptop aside. She looked out the window, where the night sky was slowly turning a deep blue. A quiet thought crossed her mind. Justice doesn't need noise. It needs consistency. She closed her eyes. No one knew that in a few hours. When the plane landed, she would face something worse than the words of discrimination betrayal from the very person she trusted. But right now, in the air, Amara only allowed herself to breathe evenly and believed that, no matter where, one could choose to stand up straight. The sky outside had changed color. The thin moonlight faded as the plane descended into the night. Inside, the cabin was bathed in a soft yellow light. Most of the passengers were asleep, and the only sound was the steady hum of the engines. A lullaby. Amara Lewis opened her eyes after a nap. She touched her silver ring, feeling her heart calm down. Elena Brooks was walking down the aisle, checking for safety before the cabin went into sleep mode. She stopped near Peter Caldwell's row and bowed slightly. Peter looked up and lowered his voice, enough for Amara to hear over the few rows. "Elena, you know, this airline didn't let people sit together like this before. They had better standards now." Elena paused, then said softly, "We're just following the new policy." "Sir?" Peter chuckled and whispered, "The policy. Yes, the world changes so fast, maybe faster than it should." She didn't respond, just nodded and walked away. But Amara heard it clearly. She didn't look over, just closed her eyes. She had heard those words hundreds of times, and they still touched her somewhere deep, where her heart hid the pain of generations. Peter had no idea that just a few rows away, the woman he despised was the one who could change the market he was trying to capture. Amara opened her laptop, the blue light illuminating her calm face. She checked the upcoming contract with the Ministry of Health, the project Peter's Helixon Group had tried to win. She noticed some irregularities in the financial report, numbers that didn't match the data she had signed. A strange premonition flashed through her. She took notes, but before she could finish typing, a tall figure stopped beside her. It was Peter. He approached, carrying a small glass of whiskey. "Can't sleep." Amara looked up, smiling politely. "Not yet, sir." He set his glass down on the folding table between their chairs. "Where do you work? You seem very busy." The question seemed innocent enough, but Amara detected a hint of disdain in his voice. She replied softly, "I run a biomedical technology company." "In Washington?" Peter raised an eyebrow. "Biomedical technology? Interesting. I have some business in that field. What's the name of your company?" Amara closed her laptop, her eyes still impassive. "Novogenics Labs." The name made Peter pause, his eyes widening, then he tried to hide it with a forced smile. "Oh, Novogenics. I've heard of it. It's a fast-growing company." He cleared his throat, changing the subject, but he couldn't hide his confusion. Amara tilted her head, looking at him as if she were reading an open book. "Yes. We are working with a number of government agencies on leukemia research." She spoke softly, but there was a wary glint in her eyes. Peter smiled wryly and took a step back. "Good for you. I believe this country needs more people like you. Persistent." He tried to sound friendly, but each word sounded like he was suppressing something. As he returned to his chair, Elena passed by, and Peter leaned in again. "She's the CEO, I doubt it. Maybe it's just a publicity stunt." Amara heard him clearly. She didn't turn around, just smiled, a thin, sad smile. Elena flinched, her eyes wavering. She realized the remark was no longer just a personal bias, but the way a powerful person maintained an invisible barrier between classes. Jamal Reed, sitting in the back row, held his phone, pretending to surf the internet but listening to every word. He felt a mixture of helplessness and anger. He had thought that such things only existed in the past, but apparently they were still lurking here, right in the sky of the 21st century. Amara looked out the window, where the moon drifted slowly through the clouds. She thought back to this morning, when she left the office in Denver. Her secretary, Marlene, had given her a file, saying there was some strange information in the investment contract. Amara planned to review it after she got to Washington. Now, as she thought about it, her heart ached. Something was wrong. She opened her laptop again, entered her password, and scrolled to the bottom of the file. A small line appeared, proposal. Merged assets with Helixon Group. She stared at the screen. Peter's company name. She turned it off immediately, feeling her blood run cold. Peter was more than just an annoying passenger. He was involved in something bigger, something that could swallow her company. Amara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't show any emotion. All this time, he thought she was just the black woman in the wrong seat. In truth, he was the one in the wrong seat. Elena turned back and asked softly, "Miss Lewis, are you okay? You look a little pale." Amara nodded slightly. "I'm fine. It's just something reminded me of something important." Elena didn't understand, but she felt that there was something very deep and very real in that voice. Peter had returned to his chair, eyes closed, but his hands were still clenched into fists. He knew he had made a mistake. If she really was the CEO of Novogenics, her presence here was no accident. A vague sense of dread welled up in him. The first-class cabin was quiet. The wind outside the window rustled like a warning. Amara tilted her head to look at Peter's aged face in the dim light. She didn't hate or feel angry. She just felt sorry. Sorry for people who had lost the ability to look at others as equals. She picked up the phone and wrote a few notes. Sometimes prejudice doesn't need to be said, it just needs to be thought about, and that's enough to hurt someone. She wrote it down, then quietly closed the phone. In the back row, Jamal was still awake. He looked ahead and saw Amara sitting still as a statue. She was probably contemplating something, he thought, bigger than this little argument on the plane. He felt like he was witnessing the first chapter of something important, something that would change the way people thought about true power. As the plane began descending for landing, the captain's voice rang out. The lights came back on. Peter woke up, looked out the window, then turned to Amara. "Are you serious? You're the CEO of Novagenics?" he asked, his voice a mixture of doubt and fear. Amara smiled. "I never lie." He fell silent, stuttering as if to say something, then stopped. The plane broke through the last of the clouds, and below, the golden lights of Washington shone brightly in the night sky. Amara looked down, feeling an indescribable feeling, both peaceful and fierce. She knew that when the plane touched down, she would have to face something even more serious than prejudice, a conspiracy waiting in the wings within her own board of directors. But now, in this cramped cabin, she had regained something important, unearned respect. Peter bowed his head, not daring to look over again. Elena glanced over, giving Amara a small smile as a thank you for keeping the plane quiet. Amara returned a warm look. In that brief moment, there was no distinction. There was only one woman who knew who she was and what lay ahead. The Pacific airplane descended slightly to avoid the thick cloud cover, and the distant lights of Washington began to peek through the night mist. The cabin was strangely quiet. Only the hum of the engine and the occasional page-turning sound of someone in the back seat. Amara Lewis stretched out her hand and closed her laptop. The screen light reflected in her eyes and then turned off, leaving her face serene in the dim yellow of the cabin light. She felt Peter Caldwell's gaze beside her. He had been silent for nearly half an hour, but not a peaceful silence, but a heavy one. A calculating silence. Amara saw it without turning her head. After 30 years of living and working in a world where black women were tested at every step, she had learned to read people by their silences. Suddenly, the plane shook violently. There was a small thump. Peter's black suitcase on the luggage rack shook and fell. It swung open, papers flying across the floor, sliding right to Amara's feet. Elena Brooks hurried over, intending to bend down to help. But before she could touch it, Amara saw something that made her heart stop. Among the scattered documents was a dark blue folder with a familiar logo printed on the corner, Novagenics Labs. The bottom line was stamped in red confidential, merger proposal. For a few brief seconds, Amara felt like she could hear blood rushing in her ears. She sat still, her eyes glued to the words. Elena picked up the file, but before she could see it clearly, Peter rushed forward and snatched it away. "Thank you. I'll take care of it myself." His voice was hoarse, mixed with panic. He quickly stuffed everything into the suitcase and zipped it up. When he looked up, his eyes met Amara's deep, calm, dark eyes, not angry, just piercing. Peter swallowed. "Oh, just corporate paperwork. Nothing serious." Amara smiled slightly. "What company?" "Mr. Caldwell." He paused, then smiled wryly. "Ah, Hellickson Group. We're exploring a potential merger." She looked straight ahead. Merger with whom? He averted his eyes and looked out the window. Business, Ms. Lewis, nothing to talk about. Elena felt the tension between them so intense it could be cut with a knife. She stepped back, coughed softly, and then found an excuse to leave. Amara remained seated. A chill ran down her spine. She remembered the board meeting 2 weeks ago, when Michael O'Connor, the largest shareholder, had tactfully mentioned that there was a partner interested in buying a portion of Novogenics shares. At the time, she had immediately refused, but now, that document was in the Helix and CEO's briefcase. It can't be a coincidence. It can't be. Peter sat down, trying to look casual, and opened the economics magazine. Amara remained silent, took out her notebook, and wrote a few lines: merger proposal, Helixson, insider in the council. She closed the notebook and put the pen on her lap. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a suffocating pent-up anger. But when she looked at him, he looked smug. The white man used to controlling the room, used to thinking everything was in his hands. "Mr. Caldwell," she said in a low, even voice, "have you ever heard that silence is an answer?" Peter looked up, his lips curling. "I don't understand what you're saying." "I believe you do." The safety light came back on, signaling that the plane was about to descend. Elena announced over the loudspeaker, "Please fasten your seat belts. We will be landing in 20 minutes. Everyone adjusted their seats, but no one noticed that between seats 3A and 3B, a secret war was starting. Amara stared at her hand, feeling the coldness spread from the silver metal of the ring. Inside her, her memory flashed like a film reel. 10 years ago. She had also lost a big project because someone stole her idea. At that time, she was angry and wanted to give up. Her father, who was still alive at the time, sat next to her and said, "You can't stop others from taking your work, but you can make sure they never fully understand it." The words rang out again. She knew what to do. The plane lurched slightly, the wind whistling through the wings. Peter bowed his head, pretending to sleep, but Amara could tell he was texting. She glanced quickly, enough to see the words on the screen. "The deal is moving. She doesn't know yet." Her heart clenched, but instead of reacting, she just closed her eyes. Maybe people always misjudged silent women. Jamal Reed, sitting in the back, also saw the suitcase fall. He peeked through the seat gap and noticed the Novogenics logo on a stack of documents left on the floor. When the flight attendant passed, he deftly bent down to pick them up, pretending to help. He slipped the paper into his pocket. It was only a second, but it was enough to change everything. 15 minutes later, as the plane began to descend, the city lights below were ablaze. Washington stretched out like a sea of stars. Amara looked down, feeling both beautiful and painful. This city was where she had built her dream, and also where someone was trying to take it away from her. But she was not afraid. She was used to fighting, not with words, but with reason and faith. Peter buckled his seatbelt and turned to her, his voice soft but full of meaning. "I hope you have a safe journey. Miss Lewis, I believe we will meet again in the conference room." She replied promptly, her voice low and firm. "If that happens, I hope you will remember your place next time." Elena stood in front, listening briefly, looking at the two people, not understanding everything but feeling that there was something serious hidden behind those calm words. When the plane touched the runway, Peter hurriedly got up from his seat. He pulled his suitcase, trying to avoid Amara's gaze. She remained seated, waiting until everyone had left before standing up. Elena approached, smiling slightly. "Miss Lewis, have a good evening." Amara replied. "Thank you, Elena. Sometimes what falls out is not just luggage, but the truth." Elena was a little stunned, not understanding what she meant, only watching her figure walk down the row of seats, her figure straight and calm, as if she was carrying a storm in her heart, but still calm. Outside, the Washington night was chilly. Amara pulled on her coat and walked down the stairs of the plane. The lights reflected off the wet pavement, her shadow stretching. Peter was already gone, lost in the crowd, but she knew he wouldn't disappear so easily this time. The company limousine met her in front of the station. The driver opened the door and greeted her. "Welcome back, Dr. Lewis." She nodded and got in, looking out at the glowing city. In her mind, she had already drawn up a plan. Tomorrow morning, she would call Michael O'Connor. She would ask about the leaked contract, and if he had indeed betrayed her, she would not be lenient. She opened her phone and reread her notes. Merger proposal, Helixon, insider on the board. She added a new line, counterattack strategy begins here. In the back of first class. Jamal Reed hadn't left yet. He unfolded the paper he'd found, read the subject line. His heart pounded. Novogenics acquisition. He knew what he had to do, save it for someone worthy. The story seemed to end when the plane's wheels touched the ground. But in fact, everything had just begun. The early morning sky was covered with a thin layer of fog. Washington, D.C. had just woken up, the streetlights still flickering on the wet pavement. In the limousine, as it glided down the deserted avenues, Amara Lewis was silent, her eyes staring into the distance. She hadn't slept all night. Her mind replayed the falling suitcase, the words merger proposal, Novogenics Labs, and Peter Caldwell's tense face. It was no longer a coincidence. It was a warning. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jamal Reed. "Miss Lewis, I apologize for the delay, but I thought you might want to see this." An image appeared the very first page of the file he'd picked up. Clear, the red Helixon seal, titled Acquisition Terms, Phase 2. Amara closed her eyes. It was confirmation. Helixon was preparing to acquire Novogenics, and Peter was the ringleader. She leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped in her lap. It felt like everything was happening again, but on a larger scale. As a startup, she had been swallowed up by a big pharmaceutical company over a flawed contract. Now, 10 years after she had rebuilt, history was testing her again. At the Helixon office that morning, Peter Caldwell was not as confident as he had been on the flight. He stood by the window on the 42nd floor, looking down at the lower buildings, his heart heavy. His hands shook slightly, and the coffee cup in his hand grew cold. The image of Amara's eyes lingered in his mind, eyes that didn't need to be threatening, but they scared him. Outside, a secretary knocked on the door. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. O'Connor is waiting in the conference room." Peter adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and walked in. Michael O'Connor was already sitting there, looking calm, flipping through a few pages of the contract. "Are we still going to stick to the plan?" Peter asked. Michael didn't look up. "If she doesn't know, we'll continue. If she does, we need to stay ahead of her." Peter swallowed. "I think she knows. I saw that look in her eyes like she saw right through me." Michael smiled faintly. "Then you'll have to be quicker. Don't let your emotions get in the way. Peter, this is business." But Peter said nothing. Business, that word sounded easy, but he sensed this time it was more than just numbers. He knew what Hellickson was doing wasn't entirely legal. Part of the merger deal involved the transfer of biomedical research data that belonged to Novogenics. He had been confident he could outwit Amara until he saw the strange calm in her eyes. Meanwhile, at Novogenics' downtown D.C. office, Amara walked in, greeting the team with a small smile. She looked as normal as ever, but the staff sensed something was different. The air was heavier. The silence was quieter. She went straight to the conference room, asking the legal and finance teams to prepare all the recent contract documents. Jamal was there, standing in the corner, clutching the pocket of his shirt containing the paper he'd found. Amara began the meeting in a low but clear voice. "I need to verify all the terms of the transaction over the past 3 months. If anyone on the board has signed a document that I have not approved, please come clean and say so now." The room was silent. No one dared to breathe. Michael O'Connor had not appeared, and that made everyone even more nervous. Jamal stepped forward and placed the paper on the table. "I found this, Miss Lewis, in the hold of the plane, when Mr. Caldwell dropped the file." The room leaned in to look. Amara's eyes lingered on the bright red headline. A chill ran through her. She looked up at her closest associates. "That's enough. They're closer than I thought." She wasn't angry. Instead, there was a terrifying clarity. From now on, all research data must be transferred to a private, double-lock server that only Jamal and I have access to. Anything related to Helixson, delete it from the system immediately. Jamal nodded vigorously, his hands shaking with nervousness but his eyes filled with determination. That afternoon, Amara called Michael. His voice came through the phone, smooth as ever. "Amara, I'm in a meeting. Is there something urgent, you know?" she said. "We need to talk about that merger deal you've been hiding." There was a long pause. Then Michael chuckled. "I guess Peter said more than I thought. You're smart, Amara, but the world doesn't wait for anyone. You should sell before you get pushed." Pressure. Her voice dropped. "I've been forced enough. Michael, no one else can do that to me." He replied coldly, "You don't understand. You're the only one standing between me and Helixson. You think you can win. They have money, power, and the government behind them." She smiled. "Then they're about to learn that money and power can't buy what I have, the truth." Then she hung up. That night, as the city lights came on, Peter sat alone in his dark office. He turned on the monitor and saw an internal email from Michael Push the deal. "Amara is investigating." He read it over and over again, his heart racing. In that moment, he suddenly felt uncertain. He had thought he was doing it for the company, for the shareholders, but in reality it was just to prove that he was still in control in a changing world. And she, the black woman he had despised, made him realize how scared he was. Amara was in her office upstairs, the light reflecting off the glass. She was writing a brief memo to the federal solicitor. The subject line, "Hellickson merger, potential data breach, and corporate fraud." She knew this was the prelude to a real confrontation, but she didn't back down. As she signed the document, she heard the phone on her desk ring, a deep, unfamiliar male voice. "Miss Lewis, this is from the Federal Inspector General's office. We just received your report. Would you like to meet us tomorrow morning to discuss the details?" "Yes, I will," she replied. The voice paused for a moment, then said softly, "You did the right thing, Doctor." She put down the phone and leaned back in her chair. The window outside reflected her face, calm, but deep in her eyes, a fire had just lit up. This fight was not just to protect the company, it was to protect the dignity of thousands of people who had been looked down upon and left out of the decision-making table. Peter Caldwell couldn't sleep that night. In the mirror, he saw himself age a decade. The fear didn't come from losing a deal, but from realizing he was up against someone who couldn't be bought. Amara's eyes never left his mind, and he knew the real storm was coming. A week later, the eastern sky was a silvery gray. Heavy clouds drifted lazily, and the wind whistled ominously through Reagan Airport. Amara Lewis stood in the check-in line, a long coat, a small suitcase. She was on her way to New York to meet with federal investigators. She had sensed something was off since early morning, anonymous text messages, a few strange calls. But she kept her cool. She was used to being tested. A familiar voice came from the other side of the counter. "Excuse me, could I switch to first class? I have a tight schedule." Amara turned slightly. Peter Caldwell. He appeared neat, but his eyes were tired. Their eyes met for a moment. No words were spoken, but there was an invisible spark in the air. As the plane took off, the sky outside darkened. A storm was brewing to the north. The captain warned of some turbulence. Amara sat in seat 2A, reading a document. Peter was in the row opposite, trying to appear unconcerned, but every now and then he would glance over, a look somewhere between worry and obsession. Elena Brooks, the head stewardess from the previous flight, emerged from the cabin. She smiled when she saw Amara. "Miss Lewis, you again. Remember me?" Amara nodded. "Of course. What a coincidence." Elena smiled, or maybe it was fate. "Are you on a business trip, an important meeting in New York?" She didn't elaborate, but Elena noticed something in her voice, a well-hidden tension. The sky outside thundered and lightning flashed. The metal clanged softly with each gust of wind. As the plane passed through thick clouds, the lights in the cabin flickered. Peter closed his eyes and breathed heavily. Amara sat upright, her hands clasped together. She wasn't afraid of flying. The only thing she was afraid of was betrayal. A small explosion sounded from the luggage compartment. The passengers jumped. Elena rushed to check. "It's okay. It's just a short circuit in the electrical box," she assured, but her eyes showed concern. Amara stood up and helped her calm down a few panicked passengers. Meanwhile, Peter stood up and approached. "Miss Lewis, you seem calm." His tone was half teasing, half inquiring. She replied, her gaze sharp. "I learned to be calm by dealing with people who think they can control me." Elena glanced between them, feeling the tension run through her like electricity. Peter lowered his voice. "I hear you're cooperating with the government. You should be careful. Not all of them are on your side." Amara narrowed her eyes. "And what about you, Mr. Caldwell? Whose side are you on?" He smiled faintly, but it was a shaky smile. "I'm on the side of reality, and the reality is, you can't win." Amara didn't answer. She just stared at him, a look that dwarfed him. Reality is never permanent. It is only created by those brave enough to change it. She turned and returned to her chair. Peter stood there, feeling exposed. 10 minutes later, the plane shook more violently. The storm was approaching. The lights in the cabin flickered on and off, and thunder rumbled outside. A passenger screamed as the plane lurched sharply to the left. Elena tried to stay calm. "Please, fasten your seat belts. We are experiencing severe turbulence." Amara looked around and saw Peter still standing, holding on to the seat. "Sit down, Peter," she yelled, but he was still staggering, trying to grab the phone that had fallen to the floor. The plane shook again, knocking him to his knees, and his suitcase opened. This time, it wasn't just papers. A small hard drive slid out and rolled to Amara's feet. She bent down and picked it up. The metal was cold, engraved with the Helixon logo. Peter lunged for it, but she held on tight. "What is this?" she asked. He growled, "Give it to me." "No, Peter." "I think I'll keep it." She looked straight at him, her voice low but commanding. "There's probably something in here you don't want anyone to know." Thunder boomed, the plane shook, the lights went out. Elena shouted for the passengers to stay put. In the flash of light, Peter and Amara stood opposite each other, the small hard drive between them. Everyone around them crouched down, but the two of them remained standing. "You don't understand," Peter shouted. "If you open it, you'll destroy a lot of people." "Me and you," Amara replied, her voice coldly calm. "Then maybe it's time someone took responsibility." The plane shook violently again. Peter lost his balance and fell, and Amara almost fell with him. Jamal rushed from the back row to help her. "Are you okay?" "Okay, but we have to keep this." She stuffed the hard drive into her jacket pocket. A few minutes later, the plane cleared the dark clouds. The cabin lights returned, and the passengers breathed a sigh of relief. Peter sat with his head down, sweating profusely. Amara stood there, adjusting her shirt, then turned to Elena. "I need to talk to the captain as soon as we land. There's a security issue." Elena nodded quickly, not asking any further questions. In a moment of temporary peace, Peter raised his head and looked at Amara. No more contempt, no more complacency, only fear. He realized she was more than just the CEO. She was someone he should never underestimate. 30 minutes later, when the plane landed at LaGuardia Airport, airport security was waiting at Amara's request. She stepped out first, still clutching the hard drive. Peter was detained for questioning. As he was escorted away, his gaze was lost in space. Amara simply said, "Sometimes storms don't come from the sky. They come from within." Outside, the rain began to fall heavily. Amara stepped out of the stairs and looked up at the gray sky. She felt something deep. The storm had passed, but the real battle had only just begun. The New York morning was cold and damp. The sunlight was swallowed by gray clouds, and the road surface was still damp from the night rain. In the glass office of the Grand Meridian Hotel, Amara Lewis sat silently in front of her laptop. The Helixon hard drive lay on the table, small and silent, a harmless piece of metal, but she knew what was inside could change everything. Jamal Reed brought her coffee, setting it down gently, as if afraid to break the silence in the room. "Are you sure you want to open it yourself?" Jamal asked, his voice low. "If it's malicious or self-destructing." Amara looked up, her eyes dark and bright. "I've been beaten before for trusting someone else to do it for me. This time, I'll open it myself." She plugged the hard drive into the computer. The screen lit up, the words "Helixon Secure Portal" appearing. A box asked for a password. Amara chuckled. "Peter, you always think you're smarter than everyone." She typed in a few characters, trying the usual combinations of company name and stock number. Each time she failed, a red warning appeared on the screen. After 10 minutes, she paused, took a deep breath. Then she looked at Jamal, half smiling, half thinking. He likes to use special dates, the day Helixon first went public, or the day he became CEO. She typed in 071219995. The screen lit up, and access granted appeared. Jamal held his breath. Oh my gosh, you did it. The files poured out like a flood. Tables of statistics, lists of transfer accounts, handwritten contracts, and a folder labeled Operation Arcadia. Amara opened the folder and saw a series of PDF files. Each one had a title like a Wound Novogenics Data Transfer Protocol, Unauthorized Lab Integration, Executive Agreement, O'Connor, Michael. She didn't need to read it all to understand. This was the proof Helixson and Michael O'Connor had conspired to steal Novogenics research data and prepare an illegal merger to clean up the profits. Jamal clenched his fists. You can give it all to the government. They will take care of it. Amara shook her head slightly. No, Jamal, we don't just want justice on paper. We want the truth to be seen. Once it's out in the open, they can't deny it. She copied all the data to a private drive and sent the authentication code to the Justice Department's lead investigator. Meanwhile, her phone rang, an unknown number. She picked it up. A man's voice rang out. Cold and steady, Miss Lewis. We advise you not to touch what doesn't belong to you. Amara was silent for a few seconds, then answered, each word slowly. What doesn't belong to me is a lie. The truth always belongs to everyone. The other end of the line hung up. Jamal looked at her, worried. What do you think they'll do? She replied, her voice light as air. They'll panic, and when bad people panic, they show their true colors. That afternoon, she went to her appointment with the Federal Investigation Team at the Manhattan Complex. She was met by Agent Raymond Lee, a calm, observant Asian man. He shook her hand. We've reviewed the copy you sent. It's enough to prosecute. She nodded. I don't just want them prosecuted. I want transparency. I want my employees, the people who believed in the research, to know how they were betrayed. Raymond looked at her, his eyes filled with awe. You understand that this comes with risks. Right, I understand. But risks are less scary than silence. Meanwhile, in the Helixson office, Peter Caldwell and Michael O'Connor were arguing. Michael threw the file on the table. I told you to keep it safe, Peter replied hoarsely. It was an accident. I didn't know she was on the same flight. An accident. Michael roared. She had all the evidence. Do you know what that means? Peter fell silent, bowing his head. In that moment, he felt empty inside. All the power, all the money, all the fame, it suddenly became meaningless. He had lost, not because she was stronger, but because she was more real. Amara left the building in the evening. The sky had cleared, but the cold still bit her skin. She stood by the road, watching the cars stream by in the yellow light. A light breeze blew, carrying the smell of smoke and coffee from the corner. For a moment, she remembered her childhood in South Carolina, the evenings her mother would sit by the window and tell her, "Justice isn't what you find, it's what you make." She understood that saying more now than ever. Jamal got out of the car and ran over. Breaking news, check it out. He handed over his phone. On the screen was a news report from the national financial channel Helixson Group accused of data manipulation and contract fraud. Stocks plummet. CEO Peter Caldwell summoned for investigation. Amara read it without smiling. She only felt relief, not the joy of victory, but the feeling of a wound healing. When the truth is revealed, The darkness has no place to hide, she said softly, as if to herself. Jamal looked at her with admiration. Do you think it's over? She shook her head slightly. No, it's going to be a long time. They have power. They will fight back, but at least we've shined the first light. Late at night. She returned to the hotel, turned on the lights, poured a glass of water. On the table, her mother's silver ring reflected the dim light. She turned it in her hand, whispering to herself, Mom, I did the right thing. The phone rang. Another anonymous message. You think it's over? Amara Arcadia was never just a project. She looked at the screen, her eyes darkening. Arcadia. The name appeared in the secret folder. She opened her laptop, scrolled through the files, and stopped at another encrypted file, Arcadia Phase D2, restricted. The security code was completely different. She leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped together. So this is just the beginning. Jamal knocked on the door and entered, carrying a new file. They want to see you in Washington next week. They said they need you as a key witness. She nodded. Okay, but first, we have to find out what Arcadia is, Jamal asked quietly. What do you think it is? I don't know, she said, her voice low, but if Helixson has it at the highest security level, maybe that's the real reason they want my company. She turned off the computer, stood up, and looked out the window. New York glowed beneath her, the city that never sleeps, where every light tells a story, every street a secret. She knew the war was not over, but now she was no longer alone. In a room across the city, Peter sat alone, looking out at the same sky. Amara appeared in his eyes not as a rival, but as a mirror of his own weakness. He whispered hoarsely, She won, but Arcadia is not finished. It was late in New York, and the wind swirled in the alleys between skyscrapers. Inside the hotel room, the only sound was the ticking of a clock and the dim glow of a laptop screen. Dr. Amara Lewis sat motionless, her eyes glued to the encrypted file called Arcadia Phase 2, restricted. She had tried every access code Peter had ever used, but they were all in vain. The hard drive was like a cold steel door, hiding behind it something she had never imagined. Jamal Reed sat beside her, glancing at her occasionally, silent. Finally, he said softly, Maybe we should wait for the federal digital team. You haven't slept in 2 nights. Amara shook her head slightly. No. The longer they wait, the more time they have to erase their tracks. Helixson won't sit still. She opened the encryption interface again, watching the numbers flash. In the silence, a thought struck her. She typed in AR Key 995 Lewis. The screen flashed green, and then the words appeared, Access granted. Jamal held his breath. Oh my God, you did it. Amara didn't reply, her eyes glued to the files she'd just opened. It wasn't just commercial data, it was human genetic research files, biomedical testing reports, and contracts between Helixson and an unnamed government agency. The subject line sent a shiver down her spine. Arcadia Project. Genetic Data Integration for Civil Control. She clicked on the attached video. The screen showed a secret meeting in a closed room, with the Helixson logo on the wall and the emblem of a federal commission. A voice, distorted through the speakers, said Arcadia's goal is to synchronize national DNA data to analyze potential disease risks and behaviors. Partners will provide civilian data through health contracts. The project will be legalized after the Novogenics merger. Amara was speechless. "Oh my God," Jamal whispered. "They want to use the genetic data of millions of people to control their behavior." She nodded slightly, her voice hoarse. "More than just control. They want the power to decide our future." Another video appeared. It was Michael O'Connor signing the contract documents, right next to Peter Caldwell. Michael's voice was heard on the tape. "After the merger, we will use Novagenics' database as the foundation for Arcadia. No one will know." She paused the video, leaned back in her chair, and put her head in her hands. All her research, years of creating life-saving technology, now turned into a tool of control. Jamal clenched his fists. "We have to go public." Amara looked at him, her eyes burning. "Not yet. If we go public now, they'll deny it. Say it's just a clinical trial. We need proof that Helixson actually transferred the data to the agency." She stood and grabbed her coat. "Get ready. Jamal, we're going to Helixson headquarters tonight." That night, they stood in front of the Helixson Glass building in Midtown Manhattan. The city was bright, but the top floor of the Helixson was dark. Amara scanned the fake ID Raymond Lee had provided, and the doors opened with a soft click. The hallway was cold as metal. They passed rows of servers, their green lights flashing. Jamal plugged a USB drive into the auxiliary port and opened the backup software. It should take 5 minutes to download. She nodded, still looking out the window. In the distance, car lights flashed. A figure appeared in the hallway on the other side. Peter Caldwell. He walked slowly, his voice even. "I knew you would come. Amara." She turned, calm. "I was just taking back what was mine." He chuckled softly, tiredly. "You don't understand. Arcadia wasn't my idea. I was just the chosen one to carry it out. There are people higher up, beyond your reach." "Who are these people?" she asked. "The people who have turned justice into a game. They think they can use genetic data to predict criminal behavior, to decide who deserves to live more easily." He moved closer, his voice trembling slightly. "I used to trust them. I don't anymore. But if you tell, they will destroy you." She looked straight at him. "I'm not afraid anymore." Peter chuckled, then pulled out a small memory stick. "This is the original copy of Arcadia's data. I kept it just in case. If you really want to expose them, take it with you. But remember, when you go public, they won't spare anyone." Jamal finished downloading and walked back. "She's not alone anymore. Peter." He looked at him, nodding sadly. "Good, because I was alone, and I lost." He turned away, disappearing down the dark hallway. As she left the building, it began to rain. Amara clutched the memory card in her hand. She knew this was her last key. Tomorrow, she would turn it in to the feds. But first she had to make sure it was backed up safely. The next morning, the news was full of news Helixson Group was locked down. Peter Caldwell resigned. The investigation extended to government agencies. She sat in a small cafe near the park, listening. A group of students at the next table were talking about Arcadia, their voices filled with anger and fear. She watched them, pained and relieved. The truth was spreading, and she knew she had lit a torch no one could put out. Jamal walked in and handed her the paper. "They're looking for Michael O'Connor. He's gone." She nodded, her eyes dark. "He'll show up. People like that can't hide forever." She sipped her coffee and looked out at the street. "You know, Jamal, the world changes when ordinary people stand up, not with weapons, but with the truth." As the afternoon wore on, The sunlight filtered through the clouds and onto the table. She opened her laptop and wrote a report to Raymond Lee. Included in the final line, Arcadia is not just a Helixan plot, but a mirror of greed and fear in every human being. We must choose control or freedom elsewhere. Peter sat in his suburban home, watching the news. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were softer. He made a phone call, saying only one sentence: "I did the right thing, at least this time." Then he hung up, looking out at the dawning sky. Back at the hotel, Amara sat alone. She played her mother's old recording, and a warm voice rang out. "When you do the right thing, you will find the world is no longer silent." She closed her eyes and relaxed. The storm of Arcadia had emerged, but deep inside, there was a strange peace. The night in Washington was thick and heavy. A light rain fell like a mist, casting a pale light over the government buildings. In the Justice Department office, the lights were still on well past midnight. Dr. Amara Lewis sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped, facing Special Agent Raymond Lee and 2 members of the National Security Council. No one spoke for several minutes. The light reflected off the glass tabletop, illuminating her face, calm but tense. Raymond spoke first. "We've verified the data you brought. Arcadia isn't just a Helixan project. It's funded in part by a special fund from the Department of Defense." The words dropped like a stone thrown into a still pool. Amara looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "Are you saying this government is behind Arcadia one of the other 2? A short-haired woman in a gray suit interjected. "It's not the government, Dr. Lewis. It's an inside group, overstepping their authority and hiding their records. They wanted to turn Arcadia into a biosurveillance tool, but you found out before it was finished." Amara leaned back and sighed. "That means we're up against the very people who are supposed to be upholding justice." Raymond nodded. "And they won't stand for it." He placed an envelope on the table. "You need to leave town for a few days. Someone's after you." She shook her head. "I won't hide. The truth must come out. If I disappear, they win." The meeting ended in a heavy atmosphere. When Amara stepped outside, the rain had stopped. She looked around, the street lights reflecting off the wet pavement like mirrors. A black car was parked on the corner, its windows dark. She could feel his eyes on her. She turned to Raymond. "I take it that's not your car." He shook his head slightly. "No, and that's why I said you need to leave." They walked quickly to the government car. As it drove away, Amara looked out the window. The black car followed, keeping a steady distance. Raymond called, his voice low. "We're being followed. Activate bypass." The driver turned onto a narrow street. The streetlights receded, the darkness deepening. Amara clutched the data card in her hand. "If they want it, they'll have to go through me." The car sped out of the city center and toward the quiet suburbs. But as they entered the deserted forest road, the black car accelerated. Closing in, Raymond yelled, "Hold on!" The crash resounded. The windows shattered. Jamal leaned down in the back seat, pulling Amara along. "Are you okay?" She nodded, still looking out. A man dressed in black got out of the other car, holding a gun. Raymond opened the door, rushed out, and shouted, "FBI, drop your weapon." But the man didn't respond, only fired a warning shot. The bullet lodged in the body of the car, sparks flying. Amara ducked. Jamal pulled her into a corner. Raymond slid aside, drew his gun, and fired back. After a few seconds, police sirens blared. The man in black ran away, disappearing into the woods. Raymond gasped, turning back to look at Amara. "Do you believe me now?" They continued on, neither of them speaking. It wasn't until they were safely home in the suburbs that Amara spoke. "I can't believe they're willing to go to this extent." Raymond poured water and set it before her. "You've touched on something many people want buried. Arcadia is about more than just data. It's about political control, about money, about power." Amara was silent, looking out the window. A simmering anger was building inside her. "I founded Novagenics to save people, not to be exploited. They use my technology to track civilians, to genetically engineer people. I won't let that happen." Jamal stepped forward, his voice firm. "We'll fight with you." She looked at him, smiling slightly. "Thank you, Jamal. But from now on, we have to do it the right way, openly, transparently. They're strong, but they fear the light." The next morning, Amara received a call from a familiar face. Peter Caldwell. His voice was hoarse and weak. "Amara, you have to be careful. They've started cleaning up. O'Connor is no longer in the country. And I think I'm being watched too." She lowered her voice. "Do you know who's behind it?" There was a pause. Then he said, "I've only heard them call each other by one name, the consortium. They have people in Congress, in the military, in the media. Arcadia is just the tip of the iceberg." She gripped the phone, a chill spreading through her. "Peter, you need to leave. I'm going to find a way to get this out in the open." He smiled sadly. "I've been in the dark for too long. Amara, maybe it's time to give the light back to someone who deserves it." The call ended, and a few hours later, the morning news broke. Peter Caldwell had been found dead in his apartment. A suspected stroke. Amara stood silently in front of the screen, her eyes moist. "He chose to redeem himself," she said softly. Raymond put his hand on her shoulder. "You changed him. Sometimes, just one person speaking the truth can change even the most inhuman of men." She looked at him and nodded. "Then I will continue." In the evening, Amara held a press conference at Novagenics headquarters. The conference room was packed with reporters, flashbulbs flashing. She stepped up to the podium and took the microphone. "I know there are many people who doubt me today. There are forces that want me to be silent, but I believe that the truth cannot be bought. The Arcadia Project is not just an experiment gone wrong. It is a crime. They want to violate human rights right at the genetic level, and I, along with my team, will expose it all." The room fell silent, then erupted into cheers. Many stood up and applauded. In the midst of the crowd, Raymond stood in the corner, looking at her with admiration. Jamal smiled, as if he saw the future they were opening. But somewhere in the back of the crowd, a man in a black coat pulled out a phone and whispered, "She's gone too far. Activate Phase 2. At the same time, in the control room of another building, the screen displayed the words "Arcadia Protocol Reactivated." The Washington sky was clear after a night of rain, but the air in the city was still heavy. Government buildings were covered in a thin layer of fog, cold and silent. Dr. Amara Lewis sat in her makeshift office at Novagenics headquarters, surrounded by piles of files and a screen displaying a series of anonymous threatening emails. Though accustomed to pressure, her eyes were still a little tired. Jamal walked in, carrying a cup of coffee. They reacted quickly. The national media is divided. One half calls you a hero. The other half says you're endangering national security. Amara curled her lips. When people fear the truth, they always choose to attack the person who speaks it. On the table, the phone flashed. Raymond Lee was calling. They want to see you. The Special Security Committee, a group I've never heard of before. Apparently, they want to discuss Arcadia in private. His voice dropped on the last two words. Amara raised her head, her eyes shining. They've revealed themselves. She stood and put on her coat. Ready the car. Jamal. If they want to talk, I'll listen. But this time, I'm not going empty-handed. The building where the meeting was taking place was on the outskirts, unmarked. As Amara and Jamal entered, they were led through a long corridor, bathed in cold white light. Finally, the steel door opened, revealing a round room with only a large table and 4 people waiting. Raymond was present, his expression solemn. The man in the middle spoke, his voice steady as if trained by years of power. Dr. Lewis, thank you for coming. We are the National Oversight Committee, or the Consortium as they call it. Amara sat down, expressionless. You are the ones who run Arcadia. The woman on the right replied, a faint smile. Run is too strong a word. We only oversee projects that have strategic impact. She looked her straight in the eye. Strategy for whom? For the country, or for you. There was a long pause. Then the man in the middle of the table spoke, his voice steady. Arcadia was created to protect humanity. Using genetic data, we can predict behavior, prevent crime, control disease. The world is chaotic, doctor, and chaos needs control. Amara spoke slowly, each word like a cold knife. Control is never protection. It is just fear dressed up as justice. Another, silver-haired one, leaned forward. You're intelligent, Dr. Lewis, but you are too idealistic. The world is not run by faith, but by power. Arcadia is humanity's only chance to evolve in a direction of order. And you, the creator of the first genetic platform, should be proud to be a part of it. Amara stood, her eyes shining. I created it to save people, not to turn them into products to be monitored. You have forgotten the line between progress and evil. The air in the room was tense. Raymond glanced at her, given a slight signal, but she didn't stop. If you truly believed that Arcadia was salvation, why hide it in the dark? Why destroy evidence, kill people, and threaten me? The man at the center of the table chuckled. Because the world isn't ready for the truth, and if you continue, we'll be forced to silence you for the common good. Amara looked around, a smile spreading across her face, but there was fire in her eyes. You think you can silence me? The news is backed up on hundreds of servers. Hundreds of reporters have received copies. Even though I'm gone, the truth lives on. A moment of shock passed over their faces. Then the silver-haired woman sighed. You're very much a woman of this century, reckless and daring, she replied, her voice low. No, I'm just someone who doesn't want to live in the shadows. They left the conference room in silence. As the steel doors closed, Raymond let out a sigh. You just made them see you as a public enemy. Amara smiled slightly. Good. When they have to show themselves, they are no longer invisible. That afternoon, she returned to Novogenics. Jamal was waiting with a new report. The international media has started digging into Arcadia. A journalist in London just published a paper claiming that leaked genomic data was used to develop medical surveillance technology. The world is paying attention. She nodded. That's what they fear most, the light. But she was still uneasy. She knew the consortium wasn't done yet. As the night wore on, Amara received an email with no sender, just the words, "You open the gate. Arcadia Phase 3 begins." She read it over and over again, her eyes growing cold. Jamal walked in and saw her expression change. "What's wrong?" She handed him the screen. He read it, his face pale. Phase 3. "They mean there's another phase," she whispered. "Maybe they don't need my company anymore. They have the technology to start it themselves." That night, Amara did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the city glow. All sounds faded away, only the steady beating of her heart remained. She remembered her mother's words, "The truth never comes easy. You must pay with your own peace." And she understood. This journey was not over. The next morning, Raymond came in with a serious look on his face. "They just ordered a counter-investigation against you. They say you hacked into defense systems, stole data. They want to strip you of your citizenship and arrest you." Jamal froze. "They're trying to reverse the roles, make you a criminal." Amara nodded slowly, a faint smile on her lips. The world is always more trusting of people with microphones than of people with consciences, but we still have a weapon, the truth. She walked to the window and looked out at the rising sun. "Raymond, I want to do a live national interview. No editing, no cuts. I'll tell everyone what Arcadia is, who the consortium is." Raymond shook his head. "You're putting yourself in danger. They can do anything." She turned back, her eyes bright and calm. "If I stay silent, they win. If I speak, at least I'm on the right side of history." Raymond looked at her for a long moment and nodded. "I'll take care of security." She smiled slightly, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Thank you. When this is all over, I may disappear, but what I started will not stop." That night, as she was preparing her speech, Jamal came in, his voice low. "Are you scared?" She paused, looking at him. "Yes, but courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is going forward even when you're scared." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "If things get worse, I'll still be there for you." She nodded. "Thank you, Jamal. Sometimes just one person believes in you." Outside, a light rain was falling. The sound was like the beating of a giant heart. Amara sat down, opened her computer, and typed the first line of her speech. "I am not against the country. I am against the fear that makes us forget who we are." She paused, looked at the screen, and smiled, a peaceful but determined smile. The storm had not yet arrived, but she was ready for it. That morning, Washington was shrouded in a thick fog, cold and strangely quiet. On the roofs of buildings, drops of water from the night rain fell in gentle rhythms. On the top floor of the National Television headquarters, Dr. Amara Lewis stood before a mirror, looking at herself in a simple black vest. Her face was not elaborately made up, only her eyes were deep and determined. Jamal Reed adjusted the small microphone attached to his collar, his hand trembling slightly. "Everything is ready. Doctor, when you come out, all of America will hear you." She nodded slightly, her voice as light as the wind. "And maybe it will be the last time they see me in the control room." Raymond Lee checked the television signal. He spoke into the radio, his voice low and concise. Secure the ground floor. No one without a pass is allowed in. All posts are ready. The screen in front of him showed a series of camera frames, hallways, emergency exits, parking lots. Everything seemed safe, but he still sensed something was wrong. In the main studio, the lights gradually turned on, the air thick. The station editor, a white woman with neatly tied blonde hair, walked over. Her voice slightly tense. "Dr. Lewis, are you sure you want to broadcast live without censorship? Once it's on air, we can't cut it." Amara looked straight ahead, her eyes calm. "I don't need anyone to cut the truth." The woman was silent for a few seconds and then nodded. "Good luck, then." The clock struck 8 p.m. The opening theme song played. The channel logos rotated slowly, then faded. Amara Lewis appeared on millions of screens across America, in coffee shops, living rooms, and restaurants. People stopped talking. The nation listened. "Hello, I'm Dr. Amara Lewis, CEO of Novogenics Labs," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I may not have many more opportunities to speak to you, so today I want to tell you the truth, not just about me, but about all of us." She paused, looking directly into the camera, her eyes piercing the screen. 3 months ago, I discovered that Project Arcadia, a program run secretly under the guise of medical research, was in fact a national genetic surveillance system. The genetic data of millions of Americans was being collected, analyzed, and used to predict their behavior, health, and even political leanings. The people behind this project called themselves the Consortium. A ripple of excitement spread from across the cities. The reporters in the control room whispered. The cameras zoomed in slowly. Amara continued, her voice unwavering. "They believe that humans need to be controlled to maintain order. They say it's to protect society. But control has never been protection. It's just fear dressed up in morality." She paused, took a deep breath. "I used to believe that technology was the way to save people. But now I understand that without morality, technology is just a weapon. And that weapon is pointed at us, on the console." Raymond received a warning signal. An unidentified vehicle was approaching the parking lot. He quickly said over the radio security team, "Check the black vehicle with the license plate 7X9. A small explosion sounded, and the signal from camera number 5 disappeared. He gasped, "They're here." Meanwhile, Amara continued speaking, her voice growing warmer and warmer, touching her listeners. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this to remind us America was founded on the belief in freedom. Freedom of thought, freedom of choice, and freedom to be yourself. If we let someone define our worth by our genetic code, we've lost the soul of this nation." Jamal stood backstage, looking through the glass, his eyes red. "She's changing things," he whispered. But just then, the lights in the room flickered. A strange electronic sound rang out. The signal system was jammed. Raymond yelled into the radio, "They're jamming. Hold the secondary line." Jamal rushed to the engineering desk, quickly typing in a command to switch the signal to the backup server. The screen flickered, then Amara's image returned, her voice clearer than ever. "I know there are people who want me to be quiet. Maybe after this broadcast, I will disappear. But I believe that every person listening to me, whether in New York, Texas, or California, understands one thing. Freedom does not require a license. It is a right that no one can take away." In the control room, Raymond heard running footsteps. The door opened, and 2 men in black entered. He pulled out his FBI badge and shouted, "Stop. This is a federal security area," but they didn't stop. One of them rushed forward, knocked his hand away, and his gun fell to the floor. They rushed toward the recording studio. Raymond was pushed to the ground, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. He shouted, "Jamal, protect her." Jamal managed to lock the safety door, blocking the entrance to the studio. Amara still had no idea what was going on outside. She finished her speech in a deep, powerful voice. "I don't ask for praise. I just ask that we remember justice is not what you find. It's what you choose to keep." There was a frantic knocking on the door. Jamal stood behind her, eyes wide. Raymond stumbled forward, shouting, "Run! They're coming!" But Amara didn't run. She looked straight into the camera, her eyes glistening with tears. "If you don't hear me, remember the truth has been told, and the truth never dies." She removed the microphone, bowed her head slightly, and then the signal abruptly cut off. The screen across the country went black. Seconds later, the backup system played back the final part of the speech, which Jamal had programmed beforehand. White text appeared. "Arcadia is more than a project. It is a wake-up call." Meanwhile, ambulances and police surrounded the building. Raymond was carried out, still conscious, muttering, she's talking," but no one saw Amara or Jamal. The studio door was smashed open, empty. All that remained was the microphone lying on its side on the floor and the silver ring reflecting the light. Millions of people shared the cut on social media. The hashtag #ArcadiaTruth went viral in a matter of hours. Those who had been silent were now speaking out, demanding an investigation. America was in an uproar. In a secret bunker miles away, a screen lit up. Michael O'Connor watched the speech, his lips pursed. "She thought a few words were enough," Michael replied, his voice cold as steel. She opened the door. Now the world will never close again. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Amara opened her eyes in a dark room. She was slightly injured. Jamal sitting beside her, his arm wrapped in bandages. "They won't kill us," he whispered. She looked around, smiling wearily. "No, they can't. We have work to do." The faint light from the crack in the door illuminated her face. "We planted the seed. Now we just have to wait for it to grow." Outside, the rain began to fall, washing away the dust and noise of the long night. In the darkness, Amara said softly, "The truth is out. Jamal, and when the light begins, no one can stop it." 3 months after the historic broadcast, America was not the same. The once crowded streets were now filled with banners, posters, and public discussions. In every coffee shop, on every campus, from workers to students, everyone was talking about Arcadia, about truth, about Amara Lewis, a woman who dared to stand up to a powerful system. Though no one knew where she was, her image was all over social media, and graffiti on walls across cities read, "The truth never dies." In a small house in the Oregon countryside, the morning light shone through the windows, illuminating an old wooden table. Dr. Amara Lewis sat there, wearing a gray wool coat, holding a cup of hot tea. The wound on her shoulder had healed, leaving only a faint scar. Next to her, Jamal Reed watched the news on a small TV. The announcer's voice blared. "The Federal Commission has opened public hearings on the Arcadia project. Documents provided by Dr. Amara Lewis are becoming central evidence in the investigation. A number of high-ranking officials have been suspended." Jamal smiled, looking at her. Did you hear they're talking about you on every channel? Amara gently put down her teacup. I just hope they're talking about the truth, not me. She stepped out onto the porch. The morning breeze was gentle, the scent of pine trees and mist mingling. In the distance, the mountains were shrouded in morning mist. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air seep into her lungs. Across the street, a little girl was riding her bike, laughing loudly. The sight made her smile. After months of living in the dark, normal life seemed more precious than ever. At noon, Raymond Lee appeared. He stepped out of his old ATV, walking briskly despite the bandages on his arm. When he saw her, he smiled. "It took me 6 weeks to track you down," she replied, her voice teasing. "You're always good at finding people. Raymond." He sat down at his desk and opened his file. "I have good news. Congress has completely dissolved the consortium. They're prosecuting Michael O'Connor. He was arrested in Switzerland trying to move money out of the country." Amara was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Peter Caldwell?" Raymond nodded slowly. "His file is considered a key witness. He helped us understand how the consortium operates. You saved his life, Amara." She smiled slightly, her eyes distant. "I just hope he finds the peace he never had before." Raymond looked at her, his voice low. "You deserve it too." But she shook her head. "Peace will not come while the world is still afraid. I will only rest when people are truly free." Late in the afternoon, Jamal brought a small box. "You should see this." Inside was a handwritten letter, unsigned. Written in black ink, "You think the consortium is over. Arcadia still exists in places you can't see." Beneath the letter was a small, silver, unmarked hard drive. Jamal sighed. "Do you think they're threatening? Or is this a clue Amara held the hard drive?" The metal feeling cold. Maybe both. That night, she turned on her computer and plugged in a hard drive. A single file appeared on the screen, Project Eden. Inside were new reports not just from the United States, but from many other countries. She read, her eyes widening. "Jamal, this is genetic data from around the world. They've expanded Arcadia beyond our borders." Jamal was silent. "You mean there are other groups?" She nodded slowly. "Not just one organization, an entire international system. Maybe Arcadia is just part of a larger plan." She turned off the screen and sat still. After a long while, she spoke softly, as if to herself. "There are wars that never end. They just change form. But at least now we know they exist." Raymond put his hand on her shoulder. "Amara, you don't have to fight alone anymore. You have millions of people who believe in you now. They will continue." She looked at him, a small but profound smile. "I don't want them to fight. I want them to live free, by their own intelligence and courage." The next morning, Amara stepped outside with Jamal. They walked along the small dirt path that led to the lake. The water was clear, reflecting the clear blue sky. She bent down, picked up a stone, and threw it. It hit the water, creating ripples that traveled far and wide. "You see," she said, "a small action can have a big effect. The important thing is not to stop throwing the first stone." Jamal looked at her, his voice filled with emotion. "You know, if you hadn't stood up that day, I might not have believed in justice anymore." She smiled. "Thank you, Jamal. But it's people like you who make justice exist. I'm just the one who revived it." Before leaving, Raymond handed her an envelope. This is the official decision of the government. They have restored your honor, restored your full citizenship, and given you a special award for public service." She opened the letter, looked at the print, then gently folded it. "I don't need a title. Raymond, I just want them to remember the truth cannot be buried." He nodded, his eyes shining with respect. "You are proof of that." In the evening, as the sunset reddened the sky, Amara sat on the porch, watching the fire in the fireplace. She wrote in a small notebook, not a report, not a plan, just her heartfelt thoughts. "I used to think justice was a loud cry, but it turns out it begins with a heart that refuses to be silent. If I had to leave tomorrow, I would still believe that light is stronger than darkness." Outside, the wind blew through the trees, the rustling of leaves like a whisper of the past. She closed her eyes and felt peace in her heart. For the first time in years, she was no longer afraid. The world was not perfect, but she knew she had planted her seed. A week later, international television reported a team of scientists from many countries announced a global data transparency initiative, inspired by the journey of Dr. Amara Lewis. In a small corner of the world, she watched the news, smiling warmly. She no longer needed to appear. Her name had become a symbol, but more importantly, her message lived on in people's hearts. On her last night in Oregon, Amara wrote a letter to Raymond and Jamal, leaving it on the table. "If I'm not here tomorrow, remember, I'm not leaving, I'm just going to find peace. Continue to speak for those who can't speak, and live as if freedom is the most natural thing in the world." The next morning, Raymond arrived. The door was open, the fireplace still warm. On the table was a cup of cold tea and a silver ring beside the paper. He read the letter, then looked up. The sunlight streamed through the window and touched his face. He smiled and whispered, "You have found peace, Amara." In the final scene, the imaginary camera leaves the small house and flies high. The sky is bright, the sunlight spreads across the Oregon mountains. The narrator's voice rings out like the last breath of the story. There are people who do not need glory, but only the truth to live. And when the truth is told, the world is never silent again. The story, Racist Passenger Tries to Have Black Woman Removed, freezes when she flashes. Her FBI badge is not just about racism. It is a mirror of how people face injustice and dignity. Amara Lewis, a woman of color, chooses not to respond with anger, but with calmness, intelligence, and dignity. In a moment of humiliation, she not only defends her honor, but also shows that true strength does not come from status or skin color, but from character and belief in what is right. The biggest lesson is don't let other people's opinions define your worth. Everyone has dignity, and calmness is the most powerful weapon in the face of injustice. The world won't change overnight, but it starts with people who dare to choose the right thing in the most difficult moments. For older audiences, this story reminds us that justice sometimes does not require great actions, but only requires one person to dare to say no when being treated wrongly. Thank you for listening to this story. If you believe that truth and kindness still have a place in this world, please like, share, and subscribe to help us spread stories that bring faith and hope.